I read many comments like this. The housing market crash is coming. Don't buy a house yet. The fall is imminent. Just wait a little bit for a cheaper house. You don't know what you're talking about. You're a realtor, so you just want to sell houses. Well, to the surprise of many, house prices will not drop. On the contrary, they will keep going up. It is true that housing inventory is moving slower than usual, maybe because of what's considered to be high mortgage rates, or maybe the drama around who gets to pay the commission for the realtor, whether it's the buyer or the seller, the fear of uncertainty with the political climate, and all the drama that comes with the adventure of buying a house. But, and here's a big but, remember that Trump imposed tariffs. Yes, there is a war on tariffs, and that impacts housing prices. In this case, it will make houses become more expensive. It is true that Trump imposed those tariffs with the hope of stimulating the U.S. economy. But that's exactly what's going to make home prices go up. Now, the decision is yours. Do you want to buy a house now, assuming you can afford it, of course? Or do you want to wait and buy it in the future at a more expensive price? But before making that decision, let's take a look at this table with information provided by Construction Dive, the Financial Times, the National Association of Home Builders, and the Associated Press. So this table right here is going to provide a list of construction materials needed for the home construction business. And at the start of the list is lumber, because that's very important. We all need lumber in the construction of homes in the US. And that lumber is usually imported from Canada. And the price pre-tariffs, it's about $500 per 1,000 board feet. Now, I know that depending on where you are, the cost of lumber may vary depending on transportation costs, if you're close to Canada or further away. But this is just an average that I'm taking in just to help you visualize what it will cost to build a home from scratch pre-tariffs and post-tariffs. The tariffs imposed in Canada, it's currently at 25%, although I know there's a lot of back and forth. One day is a certain number, one day they take it away. So for now, and for illustration purposes, I'm going to stick to 25%. And that will put the price post-tariff at $625 per 1,000 board feet. Now, next on the list is steel. And this comes from Canada, Mexico, and China. And the cost of steel pre-tariffs was $700 a ton. And the tariffs that were imposed in each of these countries varies. But for illustration purposes, I'm going to stick to 25%. And that will set the post-tariff price at $875. Now, next on the list, aluminum. Very important, right? So aluminum also comes from each of these countries. And the price pre-tariffs was $2,000 per ton. And taking an average on the tariffs, I'm going to take a 25% because each country had a different percentage. And the price post-tariffs is sitting at $2,000, $500 per ton. Next on the list is gypsum, more commonly known as drywall. That's the commercial name, the brand that was added to it. And gypsum usually comes from Mexico. And the cost pre-tariffs is $8 per sheet. And assuming a 25% increase on the tariffs, we're talking about a $10 price per sheet. Now, most importantly, what everybody likes to see, appliances, right? Everybody likes to see the beautiful stainless steel fridge or the beautiful stainless steel cooking range. All of this has a cost. And most of these appliances come from China. And the cost per unit usually averages to $1,000. And last time I checked, the tariffs that was imposed on China was 10%. So if you take a 10% increase, I'm talking about $1,100 per appliance. So if you were to focus on construction materials alone, we're talking about an increase of 4 to 6%. But remember that the increasing cost doesn't always rely on materials only. Because there's something called inflation. So you have to take inflation into account. So when you sum up the increasing cost plus inflation, we're talking that the construction cost just on materials itself can go up to 10%. But this doesn't end here. And I'm sure you know, construction doesn't happen on its own, right? You need labor. You need people who are willing to be part of that construction. And for those who didn't know, the majority of the labor that work in construction usually comes from undocumented immigrants. And because of the massive deportation of undocumented immigrants, that labor is currently at a shortage. So builders will either have to hire someone at the US rate, which is usually more expensive, or deal with a labor shortage and just simply wait a little longer to finish up a house or to finish up a project. And that means less inventory available hitting the market, and potentially the existing inventory could run out, or there could be less inventory available in the market. And what happens when there's not enough houses in the market? Well, people start fighting for it, right? People start bidding wars and they want to pay more, and whoever bids the highest price for the house wins, right? So that in itself will also bring housing prices up. But just to give you a little perspective, let's look at the numbers just on labor costs. So the average hourly wage, so let's say cost per hour, of someone who works in construction pre-deportation was sitting at $25 an hour. Now, remember, this is just an average. I know that in some parts of the U.S. might be more and some parts might be less. It all depends on the cost of living and the availability of labor at that place and time. Now, if this group of individual happens to be deported and there's less available labor, the builders will have no other choice but to hire whoever is available who happens to be documented or a U.S. citizen or someone who has a green card. And if that's the case, the labor for these people is usually higher. So let's assume a 20% to 30% increase. We're talking about an increase in hourly wage from $30 to $32.5 an hour. If we were to aggregate all of this number, the cost to build a home just on labor alone, we're talking about roughly $70,000 pre-deportation. And then if you hit that number with an increase in labor, we're talking about an increase of $14,000 to $21,000. And the new cost of building a house just in labor alone post-deportation is somewhere between $84,000 to $91,000. Now, let's go a little further and let's combine this cost that you see right here plus the cost of construction materials. Okay? So if we're talking about pre-tariffs, pre-deportation, the cost of construction materials alone, based on the prior table, is $200,000. And then with the increase of 4 to 6%, we're talking about an additional $8,000 to $10,000. And that will leave you with a new number post-deportation, post-tariffs, ranging somewhere between $208,000 to $212,000. So now, how much does it truly cost to build a house? If we decided to add the total cost of labor plus construction materials plus permit plus builder fee and whatever cost that goes into it, we're talking that before deportation, before tariffs, the cost of building a house altogether, including all of the fees that I just talked about, was going somewhere between $422,000. Now, plus the increase, plus inflation, we're talking somewhere between $42,000 to $54,000. And that will leave you with a total cost of somewhere between $464,000 to $476,000. Remember, these numbers are just based on an average. Depending on where you are, some places might be more expensive to build a house, some are not. And I also understand that depending on the volume, whether you're building just one house versus building multiple houses, the cost might vary. But this exercise was meant to just simply provide you an estimate to give you an idea of what goes into home building. Yes, I understand that depending on the market that you are, there could be a possibility that you have some inventory. I wouldn't necessarily call it excessive, but there is inventory available because people are currently in standby because they don't know what to spec. But remember, as the existing inventory starts wearing out, and if there's no new constructions hitting the market, we're just gonna basically see a repeat of people competing for the same houses. Let me know how's the market looking like where you're at. And since we're talking about the cost of building a home, here's a video that goes more in depth into what goes into the whole construction aspect and the costs associated with it. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.